Jenna Hayes' 911 call came in at 3:15 a.m. on November 15, 2022, from her apartment on Alder Street, Portland. Her voice was shaky and breathless, the sound of fear unmistakable. The operator would later describe the call as one of the most frantic she'd ever received, short, clipped sentences filled with panic. In the background, muffled noises suggested movement, something heavy hitting the floor. Jenna claimed someone was in her apartment, someone who wanted to kill her. By the time officers arrived at 3:22 a.m., the rain had picked up, drumming relentlessly against their squad cars. They found the door to her apartment slightly ajar, a trail of water on the hardwood floor leading inside. The living room was in chaos, overturned furniture, shattered glass, and a broken mirror reflecting shards of light. Blood was smeared on the wall near a photograph of Jenna and a younger man, his face half obscured by a crack in the frame. Moving carefully, flashlights darting through the dark, they followed the trail into the hallway. In the dim light, Jenna sat huddled against a wall, her face pale, a gash on her forehead still fresh. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated. The officers noted her shaking hands, her fingernails caked with blood, not her own, it seemed. From deeper inside the apartment came a low, barely audible sound, the unmistakable creak of floorboards, as if someone were still moving, just out of sight. The officers moved forward, weapons drawn. 6 months earlier, on May 10, 2022, Jenna Hayes was sitting alone in a crowded cafe on Burnside Street in Portland. It was just after 9 a.m., and the early morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the tables. She was reading a book on psychological trauma, trying to focus, but the words blurred together. She had been struggling to regain her footing after ending a toxic relationship that left her feeling lost, disconnected. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the page, still haunted by her ex's manipulative words. She had not slept well in months. It was then that Mara Collins walked in. Jenna noticed her immediately. Confident stride, athletic build, and an energy that drew people's attention. Mara looked like she belonged anywhere she went. Jenna felt a spark of curiosity, an unspoken pull that she couldn't quite explain. Over the next half hour, they exchanged glances across the room, and Mara eventually approached her. There was a sense of inevitability in the way they started talking, like two lines destined to intersect. Mara, at 35, was charismatic and intense. She presented herself as a former athlete turned motivational speaker, but there was something guarded in her expression, a flicker of something darker that Jenna didn't notice at first. The more they spoke, the more Jenna found herself drawn to Mara's confidence. Mara seemed to understand her in a way that no one had before, her fears, her anxieties, the deep loneliness she tried to hide. By the end of that first meeting, Jenna felt like she had known Mara for years. She left the cafe feeling lighter, unaware that Mara was already beginning to unravel the threads of her life. Jenna thought she had met a kindred spirit, but Mara saw her as something different entirely, an opportunity. 6 weeks later, Mara was spending nearly every night at Jenna's apartment, a presence that felt both comforting and suffocating. Jenna was slowly, quietly, becoming isolated from her friends, her life narrowing around Mara. And Mara, always watching, waiting, seemed to know exactly when to tighten her grip. By June 20th, 2022, just after 8:30 p.m., the dynamic between Jenna and Mara had shifted. Jenna's small apartment on Alder Street had become a shared space, with Mara's belongings slowly merging into her own. The once cozy rooms felt increasingly crowded. Books Jenna never bought lined the shelves, unfamiliar clothes filled the closet. There were fewer texts from friends, fewer invitations to join them for drinks. Mara always had a reason for Jenna to stay home. She suggested Jenna needed rest, a break from people who only reminded her of the past she wanted to escape. It was around this time that Jenna first noticed Mara's unsettling habit of critiquing her every move. What began as gentle suggestions soon turned into sharp remarks about her hair, her clothes, her choice of friends. On the evening of June 24th, Mara convinced Jenna to delete Sophie Keller's number, claiming she was a toxic influence. Jenna, tired and weary from another sleepless night, hesitated only for a moment before pressing delete. She felt a mix of relief and discomfort, as though a weight had lifted but left a shadow in its place. Mara's influence deepened as July approached. She had a way of making her control feel like care. On July 4th, 2022, Mara surprised Jenna with a weekend getaway to the coast, insisting it would be good for her to leave the city and clear her mind. Jenna agreed, but the isolation only intensified her growing unease. Mara kept Jenna's phone away for most of the trip, citing disconnection as a necessary step for healing. By the time they returned, Jenna felt more alone than ever, her world reduced to just the two of them. Then, on July 15th, Mara's behavior grew more disturbing. She began waking up in the middle of the night, standing over Jenna's bed, her face unreadable in the dark. At first, Jenna dismissed it as a bad dream, but it happened again and again. Each time Mara's presence was more unnerving. Jenna's unease turned to fear when she found an old photo of her late brother Kyle, mysteriously placed on her pillow one morning without explanation. She had not seen that picture in years. She couldn't remember showing it to Mara. The tension grew sharper, more dangerous, and Jenna knew something was deeply wrong. She felt the walls closing in, Mara's gaze always lingering. And Mara, still smiling, seemed to know exactly when to push further. By July 15th, 2022, just before midnight, Mara's behavior had taken a darker turn. Jenna woke at 11:45 p.m. to find Mara standing in the shadows near the window of the bedroom. Mara's eyes were fixed on her, her expression unreadable. Jenna's heart raced as she asked what Mara was doing, but Mara just smiled, saying she had been watching Jenna sleep, claiming it was calming. Jenna tried to shake off the fear, but the chill in her spine remained long after Mara lay down beside her. Over the next few days, Mara's control tightened further. On the night of July 20th, Mara insisted on reading Jenna's messages before she could, claiming it was for Jenna's protection. Jenna resisted at first, but Mara's calm persistence broke her down. The same night, Jenna noticed her phone was missing. She searched the apartment frantically, but it was nowhere to be found. Mara suggested she might have misplaced it, though Jenna distinctly remembered placing it on the nightstand. When she finally found it 2 days later, hidden behind a stack of Mara's books, several messages from Sophie were deleted, conversations erased. On July 23rd, Jenna found a note pinned to the refrigerator, an old post-it she had written years ago, reminding her of Kyle's birthday. She hadn't looked at it since his death. She hadn't even known Mara had seen it. The realization that Mara had been going through her belongings while she slept deepened the growing chasm of fear and doubt. Late on July 28th, Jenna woke again to find Mara at the desk, rifling through her drawers. She confronted her, but Mara deflected, turning the conversation toward Jenna's trust issues. Mara insisted Jenna was losing her grip on reality, questioning her memory, subtly hinting at mental instability. Jenna's world began to blur between what was real and what Mara wanted her to believe. Jenna grew increasingly paranoid, her mind racing with doubts. By August, she knew she had to find out what Mara was hiding, not just about her obsessive behavior, but about her connection to Kyle's death. And Mara, always just a step ahead, seemed to anticipate her every move. On August 5th, 2022, Jenna sat in the archives section of the public library, just past 2:30 p.m., her hands shaking slightly as she scrolled through old news articles on a dimly lit computer screen. The musty smell of aged paper filled the air, and the hum of the air conditioner droned in the background. She had decided to search for information about her brother Kyle's death, a tragedy she had tried for years to push away. But Mara's recent behavior, the sudden appearance of Kyle's photo, and the constant creeping suspicion had forced her back to those dark days. She found the article from October 12th, 2017, when Kyle's body had been discovered. Her heart pounded as she read the details again. Kyle Hayes, 22, found dead in his apartment, No signs of forced entry. His death ruled an overdose. But there was something new Jenna hadn't noticed before. A brief mention of a woman questioned by police at the time, her name buried in a small paragraph. Mara Collins, described as an acquaintance who had been with Kyle shortly before his death. Jenna's stomach turned. She read it again, slower this time. Mara had been with Kyle? How had she never known this? How had Mara never mentioned it? She kept digging, finding another piece from a local blog, dated October 20th, 2017, describing Mara as a person of interest in Kyle's case, although she was never charged. Mara had told police she barely knew Kyle, that their encounter had been a chance meeting. But Jenna's mind raced with questions, doubts layering upon doubts. She printed the articles and folded them into her purse, her breath quickening as she left the library. By 4:00 p.m., Jenna sat in her car staring at her phone, torn between confronting Mara and needing more evidence. She knew she had to find out more. She began contacting old friends of Kyle, people she hadn't spoken to in years. By 6:00 p.m., one of them called her back, an old roommate of Kyle's, Tom, who remembered seeing Mara with Kyle multiple times in the weeks before his death. Tom mentioned Mara's odd behavior, her intense questions about Kyle's life, and how she seemed too interested. Jenna felt a chill run down her spine. It was clear that Mara had been lying, but why? What did she want from Jenna now after all these years? She needed answers, and she was willing to take risks to get them. Jenna knew the confrontation would come soon, and she had to be ready. The secrets were beginning to unravel, and she felt the tension building like a storm on the horizon. On September 1st, 2022, just after 6:45 p.m., Jenna paced her apartment on Alder Street, her hands gripping the printed articles about Mara and Kyle. The room was dim. Only a single lamp illuminated the cluttered space. She knew Mara would arrive soon. The weight of the truth pressed heavily on her chest. She had spent the last 3 weeks piecing together what she could: the articles, Tom's warnings, and the hidden details of Mara's connection to her brother's death. Jenna felt a cold resolve building. Tonight, she would confront Mara with everything. At 7:00 p.m., the door clicked open, and Mara stepped inside, her face calm, but her eyes scanning the room with a flicker of suspicion. Jenna remained by the desk, her hand resting on her phone, the recording app already running. Mara asked where she had been that day, her tone light but probing. Jenna replied carefully, mentioning errands, but Mara's gaze darkened. It was as if she sensed the shift in Jenna's demeanor, the growing defiance that had replaced fear. By 7:20 p.m., the tension in the room was thick. Jenna, unable to hold back any longer, confronted Mara with the printouts. She demanded to know why Mara hadn't told her about knowing Kyle, about being a suspect in his death. Mara's expression changed instantly. The calm mask slipped, revealing a flash of anger and something else: fear. Mara insisted it was a misunderstanding, a coincidence, but Jenna kept pressing, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. She had learned that Mara had been seen with Kyle multiple times before his death, questioning him, shadowing him. At 7:35 p.m., Mara's demeanor shifted again, becoming cold and calculating. She took a step closer, her voice lowering, warning Jenna to stop digging into things she didn't understand. Jenna felt a shiver run through her. Mara's hands clenched at her sides, and Jenna noticed a slight tremor. She realized Mara was losing control, that her secrets were dangerously close to being exposed. Suddenly, Mara lunged toward Jenna, knocking the phone from her hand. Jenna stumbled backward, hitting the corner of the table. Pain shot through her side, but she stayed upright, grabbing the edge for support. Mara's face twisted with rage. She accused Jenna of betraying her, of being weak just like Kyle had been. The words were a revelation. Mara knew Kyle well, much more than she had ever admitted. At 7:42 p.m., Mara reached for Jenna's throat, her fingers tightening. Jenna struggled, gasping for air, her hands flailing. She felt her vision blur, the room spinning around her. Desperation surged. Her fingers brushed against a heavy glass vase on the table, and she swung it with all her strength, striking Mara on the side of her head. Mara staggered, releasing her grip, blood trickling down her temple. She looked stunned, but only for a moment. Jenna, now free, scrambled toward the bedroom, locking the door behind her. She heard Mara banging on the door, her voice a low, threatening growl, promising that Jenna would pay for her defiance. Jenna grabbed her phone from the floor, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. Her breath came in short bursts, her heart pounding in her ears. She could hear Mara outside, moving back and forth, muttering under her breath. The call connected at 7:47 p.m. Jenna whispered urgently for help, her eyes fixed on the door, the sound of Mara's footsteps growing louder and more frantic. The operator's voice was calm, asking questions, trying to keep her focused, but Jenna's mind was racing. She knew this wasn't over, not yet. She needed to stay alert, to survive until help arrived. By 7:53 p.m., the noises outside stopped. Silence filled the apartment. Jenna held her breath, listening, waiting for the next move. She knew Mara was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for her chance. The confrontation had only begun, and Jenna could feel the weight of Mara's secrets pressing in, threatening to drown her in darkness. By 3:45 a.m. on November 15th, 2022, police cars filled Alder Street, their lights flashing against the rain-soaked pavement. Jenna sat on the steps outside her apartment, wrapped in a blanket, still trembling as paramedics checked her wounds. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her eyes darting between the officers moving through the doorway and the ambulance where Mara was being restrained, a bandage on her temple, her face smeared with blood. Mara had been conscious when they found her but refused to speak, her eyes fixed on Jenna with a cold, unwavering stare. Inside the apartment, detectives noted the signs of a violent struggle, the overturned furniture, broken glass, and traces of blood. They quickly collected evidence, bagging Jenna's phone and the shattered vase. They found the printed articles scattered on the floor, piecing together a motive. Jenna's frantic call had given them enough cause, but the documents spoke volumes about Mara's connection to Kyle's death. By 4:10 a.m., Detective Marcus Trent emerged, confirming that Mara was now a suspect in not just attempted murder, but possibly Kyle's death as well. The following days saw Mara held without bail. On December 3, 2022, during a preliminary hearing, Jenna listened as the prosecutor described Mara's obsessive behavior, her manipulation, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding Kyle's overdose. A forensic analyst testified about new evidence found in Mara's apartment, photographs of Kyle, notes detailing Jenna's routines, and a journal filled with Mara's disturbing thoughts. Jenna felt a wave of emotion as the courtroom sat in silence. It was clear this was far from over. Mara's trial date was set for early 2023. Jenna knew she would have to face Mara again, but now, for the first time, she felt ready. The real fight for truth had just begun. On December 22, 2022, at 10:00 a.m., the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension as the trial of Mara Collins began. Jenna sat in the front row, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The prosecutor outlined a chilling narrative: Mara's obsessive behavior, her calculated manipulation of Jenna, and the suspicious events surrounding Kyle's death. The evidence painted a picture of a woman driven by control, willing to destroy lives to maintain her grip. The defense argued Mara was misunderstood, her actions the result of a traumatic past. They called a forensic psychologist to the stand, who testified that Mara exhibited signs of severe narcissistic personality disorder characterized by extreme possessiveness and a need for dominance. He pointed to her fixation on Jenna as a distorted manifestation of grief, a desperate attempt to connect with Kyle through his sister. But the prosecution countered, emphasizing her history of deceit and violence, suggesting a darker, more sinister motive. By 11:45 a.m., the courtroom grew still as a former police detective took the stand. He recounted his original investigation into Kyle's death, revealing that he always suspected foul play but lacked the evidence. His testimony, combined with new forensic findings, created a link between Mara and Kyle's last moments. The photos and notes found in her apartment were not just mementos. They were the plans of a predator. As the day stretched into the afternoon, Jenna listened, her heart pounding with each new revelation. Mara sat across the room, expressionless, her eyes never leaving Jenna. The trial was set to continue for weeks, but the foundation was laid. It was clear Mara's carefully constructed facade was crumbling under the weight of her own secrets. Jenna knew this was only the beginning of a long battle, but she was determined to see it through. The truth, however painful, was finally emerging. By January 15, 2023, at 5:00 p.m., the small town of Portland had been shaken to its core. News of Mara Collins' arrest and trial spread quickly, the details of her twisted obsession and connection to Kyle Hayes filling headlines. Neighbors whispered in disbelief, recalling Mara's charm and seemingly harmless demeanor. The community, once trusting and close-knit, felt a ripple of fear and doubt. Jenna's face became familiar in local news segments. Many empathized with her, admiring her courage to confront Mara's manipulations, while others wondered how they hadn't seen Mara's darkness sooner. For Jenna, returning to daily life was difficult. The shadows of the past seemed to follow her everywhere. She moved carefully through her days, aware of the lingering glances, the quiet questions that filled every room she entered. But there was a sense of closure slowly emerging. Jenna began speaking to community groups about her experience, finding strength in sharing her story. As the trial date approached, she knew the fight was not yet over, but something had changed. The truth was no longer hidden, and the community began to heal. Jenna felt a resolve she hadn't known before, to face whatever came next.